Deep Threat Sports Network fans, welcome back to another episode of Foul 'em Hard. I'm here with Garrett. You have me, myself, and we're ready to get after it again for another week of college basketball. We are here on a Friday night. We kind of wanted to wait it out a little bit. Things have been a little hectic for us, but a lot of good college basketball games that we wanted to make sure we could tune into so we could come to you with all the live details, all the latest and greatest news. I'm going to be honest, Garrett. We're going to go ahead and get the elephant out of the room. You're an Indiana basketball fan. Breaking news today made me really happy that we kind of held off on this. Mike Woodson. How do you feel about this news for Indiana at the end of the season? Mike Woodson's hanging it up. What's your thoughts on this?
Collin, my thoughts are it's expected. He had a really tough couple-year stretch here at Indiana. I knew this was probably going to be the case. Obviously, don't want to see Woodson leave on a sour note, but here's the problem I have with Indiana breaking this news kind of middle of the season like they have. If you're going to fire a guy, and obviously they didn't fire Woodson. They would have, but Woodson's going to end up just stepping away. You do this in the middle of the season and you keep Woodson around to finish the year, what kind of message is that sending to the kids finishing this season out? They're gonna do one of two things, and more than likely they're going to fold and just not really give a shit for the rest of the season. And you're gonna see some really, really bad basketball, or they're gonna play their ass off for Mike and see if they can go on a run. But I really don't think you're gonna see that. I think these kids have already quit on him. Doing this in the middle of the season, if you're gonna announce this, you need to let him go, other than keep him around to finish the season off.
What's funny you say that is I had the same thoughts here, honestly, Garrett, is why do it mid-season, man? And I agree with you. If to your point exactly, if you're going to do this kind of thing mid-season, you got to let him go, man. You got to turn the page. You got to let these guys have a feeling for how the program's going to go, or it's going to be in this new modern transfer portal world. It's going to be a mass exodus. I mean, you're going to have nothing left. And I guess my question for you too is, do you see this kind of playing out how college football does a little bit, where these guys lose their coach and they just go ahead and save a year essentially and try to fight for that extra year eligibility down the stretch and just hang it up and be done for the year? Or do you think they continue to play on?
Colin, I really don't know. And the reason I think this Indiana team is hard to figure out as far as, the transfer aspect is concerned, we don't have a lot of star-studded talent. We don't have a bunch of guys that can transfer to a better school to have a better situation on their hand. I think most of them, their best case scenario is sticking at a place like Indiana, which is, you may argue that they're not anymore, but a once blue blood school with a huge name, a semi good reputation. You don't really get a better scenario than sticking around at Indiana unless you want more playing time. I think most of the starters are going to stick around. And I think you might see some, lesser bench guys try to find a place elsewhere unless they can hire in a guy like Chris Beard or Bruce Pearl, who has made comments in the past that he would love to coach at Indiana. I don't think that's likely, but you never know.
I think for me, it would be crazy if Bruce Pearl did that. I know they kind of been linked together before, but man, he's got that Auburn team. That program's humming for him right now, and he's kind of built that. So it'd be crazy to see that. I'm not saying obviously it's out of the question, and that would be some. We would have to do like a breaking news, like live podcast or something like that, were to take place, because that would be absolutely insane. So before we kind of wrap up the Mike Woodson talk, how do you feel a guy like Omar Ballo responds to this, being such a polarizing player? You see him very vocal on the sidelines at all times. And obviously, in my opinion, being the staple of that team, really. Like when he goes, they go. When he doesn't go, they go nowhere. So how do you think a polarizing individual like that, gets this team going?
I really worry about Ballo, and we've kind of discussed this in previous episodes. There's definitely times, even for a whole night, you haven't seen it as of late, but there's times, possessions, periods of a game where Ballo really decides he does not want to play. And now with obviously him losing the coach who recruited him in from Arizona, what does he have to play for on a team that's really bad? So I worry that he might shut it down, but like I mentioned, he's either going to shut it down or he's going to play his ass off for Woodson's final stretch at Indiana. I'm really hoping they do that for him, but man, I don't think it looks very promising.
Yeah, it's just really tough when they've looked like there's been games where you almost feel like they gave up on him already. But then there's times where they come out and they'll take a team to the end of a basketball game. And that Purdue game was one for the ages. I thought it was a great basketball game. You texted me at the end of it. You were obviously hot, and I understand why. But yeah, I mean, it's just some breaking news, really, and it's got to your point, an essential blue blood program without a coach, and I'm sure there's a lot of guys out there looking to fill those shoes. So let's kind of build off of that a little bit, and we're going to stick with the same structure we tried to roll out last week, and we're going to keep up with that from this point forward. We have our updated top 25. We're going to talk about some games this last week that we thought were some notable scores. We have the injury bug conversation. We have our for better or for worse conversation. And then we're going to wrap it up with bangers of the upcoming week. We actually have one going on right now that throughout this episode, we'll try to give you some score updates as we go along, just so you know exactly where we were at when we were recording this episode. But real quick, going to drop the top 25, and I'm going to ask you about a particular team that I feel like they deserve to be on this list. I know they just suffered a loss, but I'll get to them. Bear with me here. Like I say, every time this is going to be long-winded. We've got 25 teams. Here we go. 25 Ole Miss, 24 Michigan, 23 Illinois, 22 Mississippi State, 21 Wisconsin, 20 Arizona, 19 UConn, 18 Maryland, 17 Memphis, 16 Kansas, 15 Mizzou, 14 Kentucky, 13 Texas Tech, 12 St. John's, 11 Iowa State, 10 Texas A&M, 9 Michigan State, 8 Iowa State, 7 Purdue, 6 Florida, and our top 5, Houston, Tennessee, Alabama 3, Duke 2, Auburn 1. Garrett, my question, were you surprised to not see St. Mary's scratch the surface a little bit?
Yes and no. I think St. Mary's is deserving of this spot with Gonzaga being a struggling team in that conference. It doesn't help St. Mary's case at all. If Gonzaga was a ranked basketball team at this point in time, you would see St. Mary's on that list. But since Gonzaga is struggling, it's really hard to leave some of these bigger name schools. I didn't take them off the list to put on a St. Mary's team who, let's be completely honest, Colin, what does a top 25 ranking really do for St. Mary's week in and week out? Their tournament bound is going to be either winning that conference or just lose as few games as you can. That ranking means nothing to them.
Yeah, and I totally see your point and totally agree with you. It's tough to win the games you're supposed to win and get on this list, right? Especially when you have conferences so deep, such as the SEC. It's hard to leave some of those teams off when they're playing top-ranked opponents week in and week out. And correct me if I'm wrong here. I think St. Mary's just dropped a basketball game last night or the night before to San Francisco, right? And that's a game right there coming off a Gonzaga victory where it was almost what we see in college basketball. We talked about it here all the time. The letdown game. You just came off the biggest win of your season. It's a staple win for you. It's a win you have to find March, and you come back and you let yourselves down because you rode the high, thought you were a little better than what you were, could coast by, gave it all in the last game, and you come up short in that one. San Francisco is not a bad basketball team. We've seen them in March many a times, but not a team that you need to lose to when you're trying to make this push.
Especially, I mean, you take a team like Florida, a team like Tennessee, where you're kind of, obviously you're a top 10 team, but you're, believe it or not, middle of the pack of the SEC. If you lose to a team like San Francisco as a Tennessee, a Florida, that looks like a really bad loss.
It is.
So it's no different to me as if, one of those SEC teams drops a game to San Francisco as St. Mary's. So if you lose a game like that, scratching that top 25 is going to be difficult.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So to kind of move on from our top 25, you're going to see a lot of those teams in that top 25 be a focal point of the conversation we have throughout the rest of the show. And we really try to highlight the best of the best teams for a reason. We don't have endless hours of time, and we're not here 7 days a week. So we want to hit on the meat and potatoes and what everybody else wants to hear. So to move into some notable scores since we last met, how this works, we told you last week. I'm going to read off games from each particular dates. We're going to have Garrett go back in. He's the expert. Go back in, select one of these games, talk about it a little bit. And you may see them come up down the stretch on our for better or for worse, or Garrett may try to avoid those because we're going to hit on those so much later. So starting this off since we last met, some bangers that we got to watch. Saturday, February 1st, man, it was a hell of a slate. We could go on for hours about the games from last Saturday. But kicking it off, we had Mizzou going into Mississippi State, taking them down 88-61. Florida, what an awful game this was to watch, to be honest with you. I was really excited for it. Florida 44, Tennessee 64. Kansas State 80, going to Iowa State, with Iowa State score 61. What a dub for Kansas State. Auburn 92 at Ole Miss 82. Vandy 67 at Oklahoma 97. What a meltdown for Vandy that was. My goodness. Kansas 70 at Baylor 81. Talk about a letdown. Goodness gracious, Kansas melted to the ground. Michigan State 64, USC 70. Texas Tech 82 at Houston 81. That was a great basketball game, Garrett. UNC 70 at Duke 87. UConn 77 at Marquette 69. Arkansas 89 at Kentucky 79. Garrett, loaded Saturday slate last weekend. Pick one you want to touch on just a little bit more. I know it's going to be hard.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, that Saturday slate was it was just unbelievable. And I'm going to try to avoid some of the games we're going to talk about later. Game that surprised me the most, game that I think probably should have surprised the public the most, Kansas State beating down Iowa State on the road. This Kansas State team is not great. Let me tell you, they're really not great. They have Coleman Hawkins, who is definitely a decent force down low. He can step out and hit a jump shot. But this Kansas State team should be no match for Iowa State at home, and they got blown out of the building. I'm going to talk about Iowa State a little bit later and the struggles that they're having, but man, offensively, they look like they are in a really tough spot. I can't believe what we saw with Kansas State's beatdown, but that's the game that surprised me the most.
That's a great pick too, and it sounds like we're tooting our horn a little bit here, but we've said this episode and episode and episode. It's a matter of time before reality sets in a little bit for Iowa State, and I feel like we're starting to see it more and more each week. You and I come back and have this conversation, because I'm going to turn the page right here and talk about Monday, February 3rd. Iowa State 52 at Kansas 69. I feel like after that loss, Iowa State should have came out a little bit higher than what they did, and they did not. And I'm going to bundle this game together with the remaining on this slate, Garrett, because just a couple spotty games throughout the rest of the week. Tuesday, February 4th, we had Michigan State 61 at UCLA 63. We kind of see Michigan State sliding in the wrong direction a little bit too, kind of like an Iowa State right now. Kentucky 84 at Ole Miss 98. Marquette 64 at St. John's 70. And Wednesday, February 5th, we had Mizzou 81 at Tennessee 85. Garrett, you got another tough choice here to make.
Yeah, and you see a couple teams with back-to-back losses that you really were not expecting. You see Michigan State drop 2 in a row, and you also see Kentucky drop 2 in a row. Both games for Kentucky I really didn't expect. What a great win, though, for Ole Miss. Getting that home win against Kentucky is really important. We kind of talked about last episode how Ole Miss was starting to struggle. I kind of mentioned that you may see them drop out of the rankings, how that win from Mizzou against Ole Miss wasn't as good as people might think it was. Really good win. That's the game that stood out to me. Getting that big home win against a blue blood of Kentucky is always a really important win.
Well, talking about back-to-back losses, I mean, I feel like a lot of these teams, like you're talking about, had that happen. And let's not forget Marquette had that happen. I mean, they back-to-back to it. You see some of these teams, man, we're in the grinding part of the schedule. You're deep in conference play. It's 2 games a week, and you can't catch a break, especially if things are going bad. You know, you're getting bagged at practice. I mean, coaches are upset. You lose games you're not supposed to. So you see a lot of these teams kind of slipping back to back here, and it's not a good look coming down the stretch. It really makes us have some talking points. It really makes things extremely interesting. And some of those things that could come into play here when you get down the grind of this schedule is some injuries. So while we're talking about injuries, Garrett, go ahead and give us an update on the injury bug that we have going around in college basketball.
Yeah, thankfully, this week's a little bit shorter. Most of those guys we talked about last week, most of them were able to return. Obviously, Boogie Fland is out for the year, but some of the much bigger names you see, Walter Clayton for Florida, he's got an ankle injury. He did not play against Vandy. From what I see, from what I hear, he should return shortly. Florida needs him back in a really, really bad way. VJ Edgecombe for Baylor, also an ankle injury. He went out during that Kansas game. From what I've seen, there's no timetable for his return. I would expect him to miss a couple games, personally. If you want to see him push it, I think he may miss 1. Probably the most important injury on this list, to me, Chucky Hepburn, Louisville, ended up pulling a groin against Boston College. He tried to come back in the game, didn't feel good. They pulled him back out. His timetable is questionable for return. Chucky Hepburn is what makes this Louisville team special. He's the one he is the dynamic force of this offense, gets everything rolling in the right direction. They cannot afford to miss 2 or 3 games of Chucky Hepburn if they want to have any chance of catching Duke at the top spot of the ACC. Got JT Toppin, probably the most important role player for Texas Tech, also with an ankle injury. A lot of ankle injuries this week. No timetable for his return. very similar to Edgecombe. I would expect a couple games, maybe one game. And lastly, you got Emmanuel Sharp for Houston, also an ankle injury. He's been in the boot for a couple games. From what he says he feels healthy. He says if he had to go right now, he could. Obviously, really no point to rush him back. Right now, Houston is rolling. So let him get as healthy as he can. I would really expect him to only miss one, maybe two more games.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's time for you to give him a little bit of a break and kind of let Houston try to do damage control without him. I think they're a good enough basketball team. Don't get me wrong. I think he's extremely important on that basketball team. Extremely tough player to continue playing through what he's been playing through and to play it at a high level. But yeah, I think it's time. Let's let him rest up. You got March. You got March coming up in the shadows here, and you have no issues of not securing a high seed at this point in that tournament. So I think it's time to let him heal up a little bit. So moving on from that, this is my favorite part of our episodes. We call this for better or for worse. And this is where we really dive deep into some of these big games. This is where we really break them down. This is where we really give our opinion and really good talking points because Garrett and I try to go opposite on some of these games. Most of them, that is. Sometimes it's just really hard to go opposite because I couldn't agree more. Maybe he couldn't agree more. So the first one that we're going to talk about here, Garrett, is Florida 44, Tennessee 64. For better or for worse on this one, Garrett, give me your take.
It has to be a better win for Tennessee, in my opinion. This was a team that was really struggling coming into this Florida game, probably the most important game on their schedule with it being a home game. No Zakai Ziegler in that game. Really, really limited depth. I think they only played 7 guys in this game. They were able to hold a really, really talented offensive Florida team to 44 points. And if you listen back in our last episode, I said, I guarantee you Tennessee will hold Florida under 50. It's a game they had to have, and they executed the game plan to perfection. They made the game butt ugly to watch. 108 points. Who wants to sit down and watch 108 points get scored for 2.5 hours of your time? Butt ugly, but that's what Tennessee does, and that's what makes them really good. And you saw them make Walter Clayton for Florida extremely uncomfortable. I think he went 3 for 13 in this game. Very inconsistent star, in my opinion, but man, you can't have that for Florida.
Walter Clayton's that guy, and I think I might have threw this out there last episode. Caleb Love, like it's all or nothing, and when it's all, look out, they can beat any team in the country on any night of the week. And when it's nothing, Florida really doesn't go as much. And you saw that in this basketball game. Excuse me. To your point, made it extremely tough on him. That's what they had to do, and they did it very well. And in my opinion here, I'm going to agree with you. This is a rare agreement with me, and it was just extremely ugly. It was a better win for Tennessee. I could go the route of saying it was a worse loss for Florida just because of how ugly it really was. There was nothing there. And to your point, it was one of those games where I was sitting back and I was like, man, at some point, this has got to pick up a little bit. And it just never did. They never really took the lid off. Neither team really settled in. To your point as well, Tennessee rolled out like 6 or 7 scholarship basketball players in this game. So great coaching, fantastic job by them. And the guys that stepped up did it, especially with no Ziegler. But man, this was just a really ugly basketball game. Extremely hard game to watch. And you and I love college basketball. So if we're saying that, you didn't miss much out there. Just know that Tennessee beat them by 20, and they took care of business like they needed to. Moving on to the next game. This was a way more entertaining basketball game. This was a game that I didn't see it going this way. I think you had talked about how this team had to have it, and they got it. UConn, 77, Marquette, 69. And I'm going to take it first here, Garrett, real quick. If I had to pick this game the night of the game, I would have picked a better win for UConn and agreed with the most part that UConn had to have it. But since I got to watch the outcome later in the week of the Marquette St. John's game, I think that this was a worse loss for Marquette because at this point in time, we talked earlier, Marquette coming off some back-to-back losses and just really doesn't have much going for him right now. Seems to be reeling a little bit. UConn needed that big-time dub, but I think Marquette just needed this one more, especially at home, man. They shot 39% in this basketball game. This was not good at all. They couldn't seem to get comfortable. They couldn't seem to settle in. They couldn't seem to get the offense going, and they really just got picked apart defensively, it seemed, for the most part. Because I do, Gary, I think Marquette's the more talented basketball team between the two of these. And when you're at home, there's really no excuse to not have an answer for a team that if you beat them in this basketball game, they may have just crumbled.
They very well could have crumbled. I mean, they were to that point. They were at a breaking point in their season where this was a game they had to win. That's why I think it's a better win for UConn. And I think the biggest thing I look at in this game, which maybe is the outcome, maybe it's not. Maybe I look too much into it. I love this Marquette roster more than probably most of the general public. I think they're built for absolute success. But I don't think Shaka Smart is a great head coach. I think he got absolutely owned by Hurley. And I can't stand Hurley, but I think Hurley just completely outcoached him in this whole game. And you really saw a much less athletic UConn team really control the pace, play the game how they wanted to play, and play to their strength. Solomon Ball, and maybe I'm biased because I think lefties always look better. I think they always look prettier. Solomon Ball is the best shooter in the country. If UConn can find ways to continue to draw upsets to get Solomon Ball in a catch and shoot situation, they're a really tough team to beat. This was a game they had to have, like I said, on the ropes, and they pulled out a really, really important road win.
Yeah, he was out there playing a little solo ball, as they like to call it. I mean, and he is filthy, man. You're exactly right. And if UConn finds it, they have Dan Hurley. As much as you and I dog on the guy and say he needs to figure out his antics and keep his mouth shut and just go win basketball games and be a silent assassin, if you have Dan Hurley at the helm, man, he's proven it time and time again. He can take lesser teams all the way and win the whole damn thing. And that's not out of the question again if they get on the right track.
And
Moving on to go ahead.
I'm going to say one more thing about that game.
Yeah,
And we kind of talked about this a little bit because during our last episode, UConn was on the ropes against a
yeah.
really shitty DePaul team. And I said, you better buckle up and watch out for their next game because you don't see UConn lay as many eggs as they've laid this year without responding. And it seems like every time they laid one of those eggs, they never really came out with a statement response. And I just knew after that letdown, obviously they ended up winning that game against DePaul, but that's not the brand of basketball that they're wanting to play. You knew they'd come out with their hair on fire, and man, they did, and they looked really good.
Dude, they're probably tired of running their ass off at practice. They probably got no tread lift on the shoes. You know, Hurley's bagging them up and down the court. I mean, and rightfully so. They're not playing good. Or they weren't playing good, I should say. So moving on to this next game, this was a letdown game all the way around the table for me. Didn't live up to the hype. North Carolina 70, Duke 87. Garrett, take this one first and tell me how you felt.
I really want to say this was a worse loss for Carolina, but I'm not going to. I'm not going to. I think it's a better win for Duke. And that final score of 87-70, that doesn't even tell you what this game was like. At one point, I believe with 4 or 5, 6 minutes left in this game, this was a 30-point game. And I looked at my wife. My wife were talking about it. Was that quite possibly one of the biggest deficits either Duke or Carolina has ever faced in this rivalry? I've never seen a Duke Carolina game get so out of hand. The reason it's a better win for Duke, in my opinion, this is a game they really should have won. They are a far better team than Carolina, but the emotional aspect of this game always seems to come into play. It's a really emotional, physical brand that these two teams always seem to play against each other. It's always a close game. So any team that can come out with a win in this kind of rivalry deserves the credit, and Duke just beat the brakes off of Carolina. Great win for Duke. They are the dominant force of the ACC. It is not even close.
No, it's not close. And we talked about this last week a little bit. We didn't necessarily think if it was just an on paper average basketball game that it would be close because North Carolina is not there right now. I feel like especially, but since it's such a rivalry game, it just had that vibe that, like, to your point, maybe Duke gets got. Like maybe this might happen. And I think for me, I'm a little upset with Hubert Davis a little bit, and maybe I'm being a little too hard on him. But since you went Duke here, I'm going to take the North Carolina side of this and talk about how I think it was a worse loss for them, mainly because of the rivalry aspect, like we keep touching on, because it wasn't ever close. A 17-point loss, Garrett, you touched on this, and you couldn't have hit the nail on the head more. It was never a 17-point basketball game. I honestly, I turned this game off. And this is a game where your less than average college basketball fan turns on. This is where like just the March Madness people come out and they just tune into the North Carolina Duke game. This is probably one of the most watched games of the season every year, and absolutely no entertainment unless you liked watching one team get their gut stomped out up and down the court and just have nothing going on the other side of the basketball. So credit to Duke for taking care of business, leaving no doubts, putting their foot on their throat and suffocating them. That's what you're supposed to do in those type of games when you're that much better of a team, rivalry or not. You take care of business like they did. Fantastic job, North Carolina. I just don't know how I don't really know how they recover from that. I mean, this is it was ugly, man. And like I said, the whole country was watching that basketball game.
Yeah, and Colin, the interesting thing to me, my wife and I talk about Duke quite a bit because she's a fan of Duke. It makes me a little bit sick sometimes, but I've grown to watch them and appreciate the brand of basketball they play. The thing that makes this Duke team so different to me, obviously the years with Zion and RJ and Grayson Allen, those teams, they were always so damn athletic. They were so much more athletic than any team they played that it was almost laughable at times. This Duke team, in my opinion, obviously Cooper Flagg is a specimen. This team isn't going to blow you away with athleticism. They're not going to blow you away with their physical strength or their speed. They do not make mistakes. They don't turn the ball over. They don't do anything stupid. They make every right play in transition. They play rock solid defense. It is one of the most fundamentally sound Duke teams I've ever watched in my life. And it's a testament to what I think the team can do going forward. It's
Oh yeah.
the feeling is you haven't even seen the best of Duke basketball this year.
This is a season with tons of parity. And I feel like there's a lot of teams out there that could go win a championship. But to me, also at the same time, this is such a two-horse race between Auburn and Duke right now that they're just different. Like you just said, they're just different. They're a team through and through, well coached, and have tons of talent to sprinkle with that, and it really helps the whole thing flow. So, kind of moving on to the next game where it looked like a team wasn't flowing for a while, and then a team now that's not flowing. Arkansas 89, Kentucky 79. Garrett, this game had tons of talking points. This was Cal reuniting with this Kentucky, fan base. Guy got booed. We talked about that last week. Does he get booed? Does he get praised? Guy gets booed. I don't love that, but I also expected that. I mean, SEC fans are rough, man, and they wanted him gone. He was gone. I don't see why they were going to warm welcome him back. It was not necessarily shocking to me like it was some people. And for better or for worse in this game, as much as I want to say this was a better win for Arkansas because I had mentioned early in the season how I thought they were a Final Four contender, and I think they might have been one of my Final Four picks. And with the whole Cal effect, man, this was a worse loss for Kentucky. And for me personally, I don't know which direction you're going on this, but I really don't think it's close that it's a worse loss for Kentucky. If Kentucky lost every game on their schedule this year, Garrett, and we looked back and said they won one game, the fans would have picked this basketball game because of Cal coming back into the building. And when Cal comes back into the building, and I'm gonna be honest with you, this is one time where I can say Cal outcoached somebody. He outcoached Mark Pope. The players on the basketball team outplayed Kentucky's players on their home court. They flat ass wanted it more, and they proved it. And Kentucky, the fans were in agonizing pain, dude. Like every time they turned the camera into the fan base, head and hands just upset. And if they could have got Mark Pope outside, man, they might have got ugly because they were extremely upset. This was a game that Kentucky needed and had to have, in my opinion, especially at home.
It's a really bad loss. You lose to one of the bottom feeders at this point in time in the SEC when wins in this conference are so hard to come by. But, and I'm not saying this is a better win for the Arkansas team. In my opinion, this is a better win for Coach Cal. I'm happy for Coach Cal that he was able to go in there and beat up on Kentucky with, and we talked about it. We knew he was probably going to get booed, but I don't think it was deserving. Coach Cal kind of built this Kentucky team to who they are. Obviously, they had plenty of success before him, but Kentucky is where they are because of Calipari. And for them to boo the guy who brought this program to where they are, is really kind of, it pisses me off a little bit. I'm really happy for Cal. I'm really happy for the Arkansas guys on this team that were able to get him the win. You know, they wanted this game more than almost any game on their schedule. If they could play like that, game in and game out, then we're finally talking about Arkansas. But they just won't do that game in and game out. That was a game they had circled. And man, they pulled up a huge win on the road at Kentucky. Better win for Coach Cal, worse loss for Kentucky.
100%. And while we're talking about Arkansas, a question that we have to have here is Arkansas a better team without Boogie Fland right now? Boogie Fland is obviously, I can't say obviously, but in my opinion, the best player on that team. But is Arkansas a better team without Boogie Fland on the court right now?
No. No, and I don't even think it's questionable. I don't think you can take away the best player on a team and they become better. Unless you're Hunter Dickinson, then maybe that's the case. But Boogie Fland was this offense. I just think you saw an Arkansas team that really wanted something, and they went and they got it. If they would come out with that energy level every game, then you're going to see. We're going to see Arkansas that we've been wanting to see. This team is not better without Boogie Fland, but man, they sure do look better.
Well, and I guess that's where I'm going with this. I don't think they're obviously a better team without him, but I think you see guys like John L. Davis. I'm drawing a blank on the younger
Adu.
freshman. I mean, Adu's playing better. I mean, you could really get on the list and they're all playing better. But I'm trying to think of who's the young freshman that comes in and plays a little bit in spot of Boogie Fland a little bit now, and has been.
Not DJ Wagner.
No, let me pull it up real quick because I watched their game against Texas. Let me pull this up real quick, Garrett. And I didn't have it on me right away, but I was just thinking about it. And it was a talking point that I wanted to have while we were going down this list. I can't find it. I'm not going to waste too much time. I just think that when I've watched them play the last couple of games, without him, I think they spread the ball out a little bit more. And I think it maybe allows them to have a few more open looks, few more open shots. Because the reason why I asked that too is they went in and just beat Texas 78-70 at Texas. So I don't know. I mean, to your point, no, you can take away the best player and be a better team. I just think they're flowing and gelling a little bit better. Maybe it was that Kentucky win that got them going.
And Colin, kind of to go with what you're saying with this Boogie Fland thing, they're not a better team without him. But it does make these other guys step up. And you saw John L. Davis and DJ Wagner. You saw these guys almost look very stagnant when Boogie Fland had the ball in his hand. It's like, hey, Boogie, just go do it yourself. We're going to stand here in the corner. And if you can't blow past your guy, just swing it to us and we'll do something. But now they actually have to play cohesive basketball. You might see Arkansas start looking a little bit better, but I don't think that makes them a better team without him. I think maybe it makes them look better because they run better offense. They don't have a choice.
And that's completely fair. And one of the reasons I thought about this too is, and I don't know if I talked about this or not yet, but when I went to that Mizzou Arkansas game, my family is friends with Dickie Nutt, who was an assistant coach at the University of Missouri, and he actually got the tickets for me that game. And me and my wife are sitting together, and we're watching Arkansas, and when they are on the side of the court that we are on, and Garrett, like, there was nobody moving when they were on offense. Like it was a very flat-footed, stagnant, boring, nothing creative, and that's when I was in sole agreement with you, and I still think that had a lot to do with it, that Cal just couldn't coach. Like, he wasn't drawing anything up. But at the same time, it was almost like, well, Boogie's got the ball. We're going to let Boogie, like I always tell you when we text, put a little Boogie in it. I mean, and now that that's not there, like to your point, they have to step up and do big things. And I think that allows players to really get comfortable. So
Yep.
I'm anxious to see how this continues to roll for them. Because on paper, it's going to be really tough without him. But like on paper, Garrett, they are still a highly competitive, talented roster to make a run.
They're a team that can beat anyone on any given night if they play cohesive basketball. If they play really hard-nosed basketball like they played against Kentucky, they can beat anyone. I truthfully think they can beat anyone in the SEC on any given night. They have the talent to do so all across the board. Guard play, small forward, I mean, you name it. They have the talent. They just haven't put it together. And, maybe that Kentucky win, like you said, was the turning point of the season. But, damn, it's a little late for that now.
You're right. They got to get in first before I get too carried away. So moving on to another team that we have spent a lot of time on this show talking about their crash back to down to reality. Iowa State 52, Kansas 69. Garrett, for better or for worse here, what was your takeaway on this one?
Yeah, I think I'm finally going to go with the worst side. I think this is the worst loss for Iowa State. It's their third straight loss. And Colin, we hit on it episode after episode after episode. We knew that this offensive struggle was coming. It happens every single year with Iowa State. In those three losses, you see them put up 52, 61, and 75 in a game that went to overtime. You're not beating anyone scoring that kind of points. You're just not going to beat anyone, especially when you're playing teams like Kansas, like Baylor, like Arizona. You're not going to beat teams if you can't score. And that offensive slump has hit Iowa State. I think they're in a lot of trouble if they can't find a way to put the ball in the bottom of the hoop.
For me, it's really simple too. Totally agree with you for all the same reasons. I mean, you knocked it out of the park. There's nothing else that I can even add about this Iowa State team that we haven't already discussed time and time again. Just thought like it was a matter of time, and I think the time has come. And I don't think they completely collapse because I don't think the Big 12 is good enough for them to completely collapse. But man, you lose a game at home like they did last weekend that we talked about earlier, and then you lose this one. Maybe the Big 12 is good enough to make them completely collapse. I still think as long as they can just win the games they should win, and it's so hard to say that when you can't score, but just hover, I guess. I feel like they're well coached, good enough, I should say. I just also worry that when the going gets tough, who's that guy that takes it over for them? It's not. I don't. Lipsy's not that guy.
I think it's Curtis Jones, and Curtis Jones has played horrendous basketball as of late. He was their offensive star, the first half of the season. Now
Yeah,
you're seeing him struggle a little bit. And what happens when the star scorer on a non offensive team struggles? You score 50 points and you lose. It's a lot to me like this Florida team, Colin. I know you're really high on
yeah,
them, but when Walter Clayton doesn't have it going, which he
yeah,
doesn't have it going about 50% of the time, they really struggle.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is a great comparison because they are two in the same, and it's a team that I'm extremely worried about, and I'm actually really anxious to see how that plays out for them. I don't know. I just don't know how well they could do in March when you're getting every team's best in the tournament. I just don't know if they can compete at a high level. I don't even if they draw a lower seed because those lower seeds are the ones that come in with nothing to lose, man, and they just let it all hang out. And I think if they are a upset potential team. Like when we break it down going into March, and I cannot, dude, I can't express how
Uh,
excited I am for you and I to do a March Madness breakdown on this show. It's gonna be an absolute blast. I hope you and I get to go live on Selection Sun. Like I'm amped up already. I'm getting pumped up and jacked right now just talking about it, as you can tell. But that's going to be like one of my teams that I am looking for first to pick out to be an upset. And I think all these reasons are why. One guy goes cold, the wheels are off. So cannot wait for that, though. We got a little bit of ways to go. Another game I'm going to talk about, too, for better or for worse, Kentucky, 84, Ole Miss, 98. See Kentucky on the wrong side of this again. Garrett, I'm going to go ahead and take this one right here off the rip and say, yes, Ole Miss needed this basketball game. But yet again, this is a worse loss for Kentucky, in my opinion. You come off the big asterisk game that was highlighted on your schedule with the reuniting of playing Cal, and you lose it. You kind of get backed in the corner. Makes me feel a little bit nervous that Kentucky might have lost a step. Maybe they got punched in the mouth. They didn't like it, and now they don't really know how to react. And you got beat on a national stage because probably right there behind that UNC Duke game. If you're a casual basketball fan, you watched the Arkansas Kentucky game, and it was embarrassing for them. And I don't think they know how to respond. I don't think Mark Pope really knows how to respond in this moment. You kind of heard some rumblings out there that the guy lost his cool a little bit, lost his mind, had a meltdown for the losses. I get it, but at some point too, man, you gotta get it under control and be a coach. I don't. You haven't done enough. Is that the right way to say this? You haven't done enough as a coach yet to really be in the public's eyes in such a negative light when the going gets tough for your team. So I think this was a melting point almost for Kentucky, but I don't want to take away anything away from what Chris Beard and Ole Miss did. I mean, hell, they scored 98 points.
piggybacking off the 98 points, Kentucky's got to find a way to get a couple defensive stops throughout the course of a game. They have allowed over 90 points more times than I can count on two hands. I say this all the time. Offense is going to win you a national championship. But if you're allowing 90 points on a routine basis, you're not winning anything. And they gave up 89 to an Arkansas team who was really kind of struggling going into that game. They really have not put anything together. And then they give up 98 to an Ole Miss team that offensively is above average, but they're not a 98-point offensive team. They don't have that firepower in them. I do think it's a better win for Ole Miss, in my opinion, but there's so many reasons to point at why this is a bad loss for Kentucky. Ole Miss was just at a spot in their season where wins are getting to be a very important thing for this Ole Miss team. I kind of touched on it before we started this better or worse segment, but this Ole Miss team was starting to trend in the wrong direction. Getting a home win against a blue blood team like Kentucky is nothing but a confidence boost going down the stretch. It's a really good win for Ole Miss, and it was a better win for them.
Yeah, and it's hard to dispute against that, right? You see them slip all the way down in the top 25. They're hanging on by a thread, looking like the team that's going to slip out. Start having conversations. Are they in? Are they going to be out? Like, what? How does it really go for them if they continue on this trend, the downward spiral that they were on, and rip the e-brake on that one? That's huge for them. You're absolutely correct. Talking about this next game, for better or for worse, St. John's, man, I have rode this jock, and I'm not going to stop. Marquette 64 at St. John's 70. Garrett, you go first because I think everybody that listens to our shows already knows where I'm going with this one.
Yeah, and Colin, I watched this game start to finish. It was a really, really entertaining basketball game. I think can I say it's a worse win for St. John? Because they absolutely dominated this game. From start to finish, owned Marquette. And every time I looked up at the screen, it's like, damn, like this is a 2-point game. Like, damn, Marquette just took the lead. Let me put some numbers out here for you, Colin. St. John's out-rebounded Marquette 50-28. St. John's had 21 offensive rebounds and shot 31 free throws and won by 6. I am maybe the first time ever I'm going to say this was a worse win for St. John's, but in my opinion, it was a worse win because they looked so good, yet won by such a slim margin. It's a game Marquette really let slip away from them. I would really like to see them pick up a win that time, but man, they didn't. So I guess with that being said, I'm going to have to say it's a worse loss for Marquette. But really, St. John's is very fortunate to come away with a win in this game.
So before I give mine, because it's obvious, I'm going to say better win for St. John's. Very well put by you because it was an ugly but good win. I don't know how to explain it. I don't know how to explain it. Other than the fact that they played like a team and they got it going and the confidence is there and they edged one out against a really good Marquette basketball team. But you said something earlier in this episode about Shaka Smart that I wanted to wait until right now to readdress. Is he an extremely overrated basketball coach? They've had extremely good basketball teams at Marquette in the previous years. His long sleeve wearing ass is really starting to let things slip. Like it's time to have a few questions about him, man. He's had extremely good teams, extremely good players, and it has been. This wasn't really an upset, but like you know what I'm talking about. In the last few years, you let some games slip in the tournaments that you shouldn't. You let some games slip in conference that you shouldn't, and you should be a dominant force right there with UConn. You have out talented UConn in the previous years, and still ended up on the losing side of that.
Yeah, I'm there with you on everything. And the thing about Shaka Smart, and he was like this when he was at Texas. He was like this when he was his previous stop at VCU. They win the games they're supposed to win. Obviously, his VCU success was much different because they didn't have the expectations that he had at Texas and at Marquette. But he always wins the games during the regular season that he's supposed to win. You get him in a top 25 matchup on the road, at home, in March, whenever it is, conference tournament, Shaka Smart never wins. And I don't understand why he can't do it. He seems to have a great team every single year. This Marquette team is arguably one of the best rostered teams he has ever had. I think he makes good coaching decisions. I don't think he ever uses bad timeouts. I think he draws up good plays. For some reason, he just can't get over this hump, and it's starting to become a concern because he just can't win the games that really mean something.
I think it's one of those deals that when it happens time and time again, and you find yourself being in those games time and time again, you overthink the shit out of everything. And like once one or two things go bad for you, you just already feel it. Like I feel like he's that guy that has that internal conversation already that's just like, holy shit, man, I'm gonna do this again. And like doesn't really know how to just pick his team up and be like, hey, get out there, punch him in the mouth, get a stop, get a bucket, we're back. Silence the crowd, we're back. And I don't feel like he does that as well as some of these other coaches. And I think that's going to become a more focal point down the stretch with Marquette if the same thing happens again this year because they have one of the best players in the country and Cam Jones. Like this is without a doubt, Garrett, one of the best players in the country.
Yeah, and I'll say this, Colin. Your St. John Red Storm made Cam Jones look the most uncomfortable I've ever seen a star look in my life. It was the best. It was the most impressive defensive display of basketball. I don't know if you saw the clip. Obviously, I watched the whole game, but there's a clip where Marquette was down roughly 6, 7 points with about minute 50 left. Obviously, this is a time in the game you have to score quickly. It took Marquette like 26 seconds to even get a look. I mean, not a good look, to get a look at the basket. It's the most suffocating defense without fouling I've watched in so long. If this St. John's team could just hit a few threes, we're talking about one of the best teams
Yeah.
in the country.
Yeah, man. That and I don't know how I've let that go on for so long without addressing it. They are not a good 3-point shooting team. That will be a problem. If they find themselves down at a large margin early in basketball games, that's when it's going to be really hard for this St. John's team to come back in a basketball game and win it in a little bit of adversity. Whenever they are controlling the pace, they are up and down the court, they're going in, and that's why they shoot so many free throws. You touched on this 31 free throws. They shoot so many free throws because they are a team that pounds the rack, dude. They get in there, they are mean, they are tough, they are hard nosed, and they are hard nosed coached. That's why I love them. But you're right. You find yourselves in March, because this is a March team without a doubt, and you find yourselves in March playing some of these mid-major teams that can come in here and all they do is shoot the lights out and they make a few and you can't. Yeah, it's concerning. So they got to find a way to get some guys open on the perimeter and get some really good looks.
It's concerning because, to my knowledge, and you've probably watched a lot more St. John's than I have this year. I've tuned into quite a few games, but Colin, I don't know if I've seen them trail by more than 7 or 8 points at any point in time during the season. And just like you said, these mid majors, what happens when you got a 10-10 ball game and a mid major hits three threes in 52 seconds and St. John's find themselves down 9? It's going to take them 5 possessions to get back in this game if they can't knock down some threes.
So funny stat for you here. Then we'll move on to my other favorite team. They have 3 losses this year so far. St. John's does, and I don't want to jinx them because they're playing right now and they're playing UConn. And last I looked, they were up at UConn at halftime. You know how many points they've lost by in their 3 losses? Combined total points.
I'm going to take a guess. I'm going to say 10.
Lower.
8.
Lower.
4.
5 points they have
See,
lost by in 3 games.
that's impressive, but it's a factor for 2 reasons. Their smothering defense and their ability to get to the free throw line. If
Yep.
they run into the wrong team, and hell, if they run into the wrong officials in March that do not get them to the line, they're in trouble, man. They've got to start shooting the ball a little bit better. And I talked about their free throw issues against Marquette. They shot 31 free throws, but they only made 17 of them. If you're going to get to the line that much, you have to make them.
Bingo. If you're not going to be a good 3-point shooting team, buddy, your team better shoot 92% from the free throw line. And that's all there is to it. And I love Kadari Richmond. I could sit here and talk about Kadari Richmond and St. John's all night. But we're going to kind of move on to this next one. I hope St. John's hangs on, by the way. Piss on Dan Hurley. Let's go St. John's. But moving on to this next game, Mizzou 81 at Tennessee 85. Everybody out there that listens to us knows as well that I have got a lot to say about this Mizzou game. So I'm going to let you go first, and then I'll just kind of take it in and fill the gaps and add some things that I think I saw, and you just let me know what you think.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to fire you up a little bit. I'm gonna say it was a better win for Tennessee. And the reason I'm gonna take this route is not just to fire up a Mizzou fan, but I truthfully think it was a better win for Tennessee. We talked about their win against Florida, scoring 64 points and only allowing 44. There's one side of Tennessee, the side of Tennessee that probably they want to see. Then you have this side where you win an 85-81 shootout, which is probably not the kind of game Tennessee wants to find themselves in because offensively, they're not going to give you 81 points on a regular basis. Mizzou caught Tennessee on a really tough night for them. Obviously, Tennessee shot their balls off from three. But you know what? You've got to be able to win games in more than one fashion. And you know I don't like Tennessee, but it's a great win for them at the time simply because their offense was reeling. They had dropped a couple games before then, obviously before the Florida loss, but it was just a really important point of their schedule where they were able to pull out 2 ranked wins at home. They took care of the business they had to. Really good win for Tennessee.
Well, surprisingly enough, Garrett, honestly, I'm going to agree with you that it was a better win for Tennessee. And one of the things that I think you said absolutely knocks it out of the park in the sense of if Mizzou, I knew going into this game, and I think Mizzou, and I think Dennis Gates, and I think everybody that is a Mizzou Tigers through and through fan knew going into this game, if you were going to beat Tennessee, you wanted to take Tennessee to a shootout. Well, that's exactly what happened. Tennessee just happens to shoot 66% from three. That makes it extremely, extremely tough when they're hanging and banging with you, and that's the best part of your game as the Missouri Tigers is shooting a three ball, and you can throw it up from anywhere. A couple things that I saw on the flip side of this from Mizzou that concerned me a little bit, but then again, at the same time, it doesn't because it's 81-85 and they shot 66% from three, and you still found yourself at Tennessee only losing this game by 4. But also, I have said this time and time again, and I get extremely concerned, and that he's a great coach, and he obviously is there, and I'm not, and he knows more than me about basketball. But man, the running 9 and 10 and 11-man rotation sometimes really irritates me. I know you are an extremely deep basketball team, and that is incredible, especially if we were dealing with injuries, especially if we're late in the season and late in the tournament and you have injuries stacking up. But man, Garrett, we don't have any injuries. We haven't had any injuries. We have one guy out. He's a freshman. He's 7'2". Wasn't a focal point of this team coming into the season, and he hasn't been one since because he's been hurt. I hate the deep rotations. When you allow – you were leading this game at halftime by 6, if I remember correctly, 34-28. When you come back out of halftime and you can see that Tennessee is totally running a different defense setup, they are on ball all over your ass. They are on you like a gnat's ass on the three-point line. They're not letting Grill get any looks. They came out with a great game plan. Why did we start taking the ball out of our best players' hands so much? And I think Warwick came in and did great things. You saw Warwick do some things that it was really good to see. I think T.O. Barrett, when he comes in, I think he's a great ball handler. One thing that has to stop right now, this instant, if you want to be a team in March that rattles some cages, Anthony Robinson, dude, head out of ass, you foul out of every basketball game, okay? You had 3 fouls in the first, 6 minutes of this basketball game. And then you come back out in the second half and he starts you and you foul within the first minute and 20. That shit has to stop because he's a difference maker on the court. That is unacceptable. And I get that's why sometimes the rotations get off. But, man, I think when the going gets tough like this, you need to find the ball in Tamar Bates' hands. You need to find the ball in Caleb Grill's hands more. I know they were on him, but you got to outcoach them. If you're going to win big-time games at big-time venues against big-time teams, you got to outcoach them. You got to get guys open. You got to draw plays up. Mark Mitchell, I love you, man. Great basketball player. One of our dearest friends, Garrett Bryant, he is a diehard Mizzou fan, and he will argue with me all day about how he thinks Mark Mitchell's the best player on this team. I disagree. I totally disagree. I think he tries to do way too much sometimes, and I think he looks dumb for it. And if you're going to drive the rack like that, get better at the free throw line. Now I'm off my soapbox.
A few things to kind of piggyback off of with that. The 10-man rotation is awesome. In college basketball, if you have faith in 10 guys to roll in and out of a basketball game, what a luxury you have. Here's what I'll say, though. I don't think Mizzou needs to feel inclined to play all 10 guys throughout the course of the game. What you do, you give each 10 of those guys, obviously your starters and Grill are going to get more minutes than the other 4 guys. Of those 4 guys that you're bringing in that are not your starters or your key bench players, figure out which 2 have the hot hand, whether it's offensively, defensively, who has the pep in their step, and you roll with them. And the other guys, don't bring them in. If they don't have what it takes on that given night, quit rolling them out there. It's a blessing and a curse if you try to force this 10-man rotation. Time and time again, you see teams like Tennessee the other night. They rolled out 7 players for the whole game. They're 5 starters, 2 bench players, and won the most important basketball game of their season. Sometimes I think Mizzou needs to take that 10-man rotation, shrink it down to 7, to 8. Obviously, you got to have Tamar Bates, Grill. You got to have these guys get respectable minutes and make sure that they're shooting a majority of the shots. But you don't need to have 10 guys coming off your bench every single game.
Well, and I think, too, with that, the guys that come off your bench and aren't necessarily your starting 5 or your starting 6, because I know Caleb Grill is up for 6th man of the year because he doesn't start. He likes to get the feel of the game, come off the bench. I love that. That's fantastic. That's great. Because Tony Perkins is a great guy to plug into that role for a little bit, especially if you see him get hot like he did in this basketball game. I also know the aspect of, hey, a lot of these guys on this roster have a lot of minutes played elsewhere. They're experienced guys. They've got a lot of time. I respect that. But there's some guys you got to put a leash on sometimes, like Cruz, man. The guy just throws it up every time he has the ball. There was like 3 possessions in a row when Tennessee was getting back in this basketball game, and you can kind of feel the momentum shift, and you see Jacob Cruz on the court, pull up, shoot. See Jacob Cruz on the court, touch the ball, no pass, go to the lane, try to drive it. Listen, man, you're not that guy. You are a great shooter, but you're not that guy, and we don't need that right now. Let's let one of these other players on the team that are better, more skilled, get a touch of the ball. And I don't want to sit here and just carry on about the Mizzou game because obviously I'm such a fan, but just some things that I see that are concerning, but also to your point are a luxury because if you got a few guys go down, you got guys with a lot of minutes played. So I think they're still fine. Obviously, I'm not trying to say they're not. They're a great basketball team.
I think Mizzou is still to this point the most underlooked and disrespected team in college basketball. I can't believe I'm even saying that. This Mizzou team is different. This Mizzou team is good. They're deep. Obviously, we've just talked about their depth for the last 5 minutes. And I really think they are the most undervalued and underappreciated team, not only in the SEC, but in college basketball. They can beat anyone.
Yes. I would agree with that. I really would agree with that, especially if the main guys in that rotation are clicking and going. I mean, they're lethal, man.
They're lethal. I want to put one more thing out about Mizzou. The thing I love about them, they have 3, maybe 4, but I'd say 3 guys on their team that on any given night can carry the offensive load.
Yep.
And that is really, really rare in college basketball. You've seen Caleb Grill do it a couple of times. Tamar Bates is always capable of doing it. And every now and again, you'll see Mark Mitchell make an impact offensively. But he is nowhere near the most important player on the team, in my opinion.
No, and what's crazy, too, though, is I'm add to that a little bit. I think you have those 3, and there's 3 more that could get up and do it if they needed to. And Tony Perkins. And I'm such a fan of Trent Pierce, dude. I think that guy has got all the intangibles. I'm a huge fan of him. I think he could get up and do it some nights. I also think Anthony Robinson is the most underrated player on this basketball team if he could just keep his ass on the court. The guy had 6 minutes in this basketball game, and I think he is the most talented player on the team. I mean, stay on the court, dude. If the guy blows by you, don't get a reach and foul. 48 feet away from the basket for no damn reason. All right, man. Reel it in. Get a grip on that shit. We'll be a better team when you're on the court.
One more thing, and you don't even have to answer it. I just want to throw it out there. Imagine if this team had someone like, I don't know, like John Tanji.
Yeah. 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 We'd have a 12-man rotation. I don't know.
There you go.
Oh, man. All right. So wrap it up for better or for worse. That's where we really get deep into it. I love that topic, that headline, those conversations that Garrett and I have. We really break it down, throw some fun things out there. Got a couple more topics here for you, and then we'll wrap this thing up. Garrett, last week we did our conference undefeateds. We're going to keep doing this till we don't have any. There were 4. Now we have 2. Auburn and Duke. And I don't think it's up for question that we are surprised by that. But which one – I'm going to ask you a question. Which one of these 2 do you think has the potential to make it undefeated in conference play the longest?
I think it would be foolish of me to say Auburn. I think it would be completely foolish of me to even consider that Duke is going to quite possibly – they're probably their toughest game remaining on the schedule is on the road at Carolina, who they just slaughtered at home. But it's going to be a different story on the road. This Duke team, they will probably drop a game we're not expecting, but they have a legitimate shot to go undefeated in the ACC. And I would be curious to see when the last time that happened was in the ACC conference. I am really curious of that, to be honest with you.
Well, I'm going to agree with you for that exact reason. I think that's the only right answer. Auburn has way tougher opponents night in, night out. Duke does not. I almost feel like it would be more surprising and upsetting if Duke did lose a conference basketball game the rest of the way at this point. I know it's hard to do, but good Lord, man. ACC's down, and Duke is by far and away the best team in the ACC, and it is not even a talking point. So I'm assuming we're going to come here next week, and it's going to be Auburn and Duke still undefeated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was trying to look up when the last time a team went undefeated in the ACC was, and it's just taken too long to find. So I'm going to abandon that ship. But the problem with trying to even defend Auburn is, every single game they step out on the floor, they're going against a quality opponent in the SEC. They are bound to lose a game at some point in time. I just don't see a team like Georgia Tech or Notre Dame or Syracuse beating Duke. I really don't. The only team that I think can give them a good fight is a team like Louisville, who can maybe knock down 15 threes and just outscore them. But I still don't see that happening.
And Louisville's going to need Chucky.
They're going to need Chucky.
They're going to need a lot of Chucky. And that's their only hope. And this kind of rolls right into our bangers of the week segment a little bit, because I'm looking down at it before I even announce all these games. Duke's not on here because Duke doesn't have any bangers. Auburn is on here. So leading off, the game right now, Friday, February 7th, number 12, St. John's, and number 19, UConn. Like I said earlier, last I looked, St. John's was up 2.5, I believe. Does that still stand, Garrett?
That still stands. They're up 37-35 at half. Do you want to try to dive in? Who do you think? Obviously, I think you're going to go with St. John's, but do you think UConn pulls it out?
I did sprinkle a little bit on St. John's first half +2. I thought that was pretty generous, and I have that mindset, and I've kind of got that mindset from you a little bit after talking to you more and more throughout the years about college basketball, that UConn comes off a couple big wins, and I think they came in a little bit flat at home, and St. John's has something to prove. That's why I leaned that. But no, I don't want to sound like I'm making such a homer pick to pat myself on the back. I think UConn edges this one out. I really do. And I think they should. And if they don't, hey, St. John's, you did it again, and you're even better than I just thought you were.
Yeah, I think UConn ends up pulling out a win in this one. But I tell you what, if St. John's can muck it up defensively like they did against Marquette, UConn is far less talented offensively, in my opinion, than Marquette is. And
yes,
they made Marquette look incredibly uncomfortable. They can do that tenfold to this UConn team.
Yes, without a doubt. Moving on to Saturday, February 8th, we have another banger slate. Obviously, Saturdays are big days for college basketball. Leading it off, we have number 10, Texas A&M, at number 15, Mizzou. Garrett, pick one.
I'll go Mizzou. I think they're going to
All right.
bounce
Hey,
back after a tough loss on the road against Tennessee. I think they come out with a little bit of juice on them. I'm going to take Mizzou.
I'm obviously going to take Mizzou too. I'm not going to go against them, especially at this point. Mizzou is very tough at home. They seem to be real, real comfortable at the home court, and that's obviously how it should be. So Mizzou Tigers for me as well. Then we have number 11 Marquette at Creighton. Interesting game here. Garrett, who are you taking in this one?
I'm going to take Creighton. I'm going to take them simply because of the size of Kalkbrenner. I think Kalkbrenner's going to give Marquette all kinds of fits. I think Stephen Ashworth at home is going to be able to control this game as much as he wants to. He looks so controlled at home, so much more controlled at home than he does on the road, in my opinion. This Creighton team, we kind of dogged on them a little bit, but they have everything they need
Yeah.
to be elite. I think you're going to see them creep into the top 25, regardless if they win or lose this game. I really do. Now, if they get
Garrett,
blown out, you won't. But this is a top 25 team.
yeah. And I think that's why we dog on them because we're upset with that the fact that they're not doing enough to get themselves there yet. And the Kalkbrenner is like one of the best players in the country that we just don't even talk about right now because he's just not doing the things that we want him to do all the time.
Yep.
And Ashworth, yeah, when he gets hot, man, he's one of the best shooters in the country too. So I was going to take Creighton because I didn't think you would. I'll take Marquette just to for us to go opposite on this. But yeah, if I watch that game and Creighton ends up with a dub next to their name, it would not surprise me. And this is another one of those times where Shaka has to rally the troops and stop the bleeding. Talked about that earlier. If they pull this off, it'd be a big win, I think.
It would be huge. They're coming off of 2 losses. They need a win. But I think Creighton's too much to handle for Marquette on the road.
That's also a total Creighton move to lose this game as well, obviously. I mean, that's
100.
just – so the next game, number 6, Florida at number 1, Auburn. Garrett, I don't think this is close. I think Auburn makes a statement again, and I think they win large, I think. I want to go that route.
I think Florida gives Auburn their first loss.
Okay, all
I
right,
really
all
do.
right.
They looked so horrendous against Tennessee. I think you're going to see a really impressive bounce back win. They have to control Broom. If they let Broom go for 30, then just turn the TV off because Auburn's going to run away with it. But if they can control Broom and Walter Clayton can look like Walter Clayton, listen, he had a bad game last game. He's due for a big one. I
That
really think Florida has a shot to hand to hand Auburn their first loss.
and Clayton and Elijah Martin, they're good to go, right? They're playing.
From what I understand, they're playing. I know he's got a bum ankle, but he's not missing this game.
No, and if they both go, yes, they can win this game. Absolutely.
I
I
think it'd be worth Colin. I don't know if I had to guess. I don't know if spreads are out yet for these games. I will
Auburn minus 8.5.
see, and I thought it was going to be more like 12-13. That's fishy, Colin. That's fishy. Why are they only 8-point favorites at home? They beat
That's one of
everyone
them.
by 20.
That's one of them smelly lines you text me about. This might have me going Florida. I'm going to be. I mean, this might be it.
I,
Man,
it's a really good spot for them after looking so bad in their
this
last
game's
game.
this game's tomorrow at 3 o'clock on ESPN too. Am I missing something? Why is it not on
ESPN
ESPN?
2.
Yeah, what am I missing?
All right, we got to look right now. Who's on ESPN?
This is a top 6 matchup. The other game at 3 o'clock. There's no basketball game. Kansas State's at 1 o'clock on ESPN. What is bigger that we don't know about at 3 o'clock tomorrow?
What are we missing?
I love the waste management, but I know it's not on at 3 o'clock on
No,
ESPN.
I don't know. That's going to be interesting. They probably got a 30 for 30 on there.
Oh, if it's Mike Vicks though, man, too, that's a good one. I
I
like Mike Vick.
I do too, but I'm not missing that basketball game.
Oh man. All right, next game we got number 13 Texas Tech at number 20 Arizona. I'm gonna let you go first on this one, and then I'll pick up the slack.
It's a weird game for me. I think this game could go either way. I'm still not sold on this Arizona team. I know they have a number 20 next to them, but I'm just not there with it yet. I think Texas Tech is going to abuse them physically. I don't think Arizona likes any sort of physicality thrown their way. If JT Toppin doesn't play, it changes my opinion just a touch, but I still think Texas Tech is just going to they're going to abuse them physically and make this Arizona team so uncomfortable. If you throw a little bit of adversity at Caleb Love, good night.
Good night. Yep, I'm with you. Same things included. Texas Tech, as long as Toppin's in there, as long as Toppin's healthy, Texas Tech, and I think Texas Tech could win big at Arizona. Next game, number 3, Alabama at the hot Arkansas Razorbacks. Garrett, this is Alabama big. Arkansas crashes back down to reality, coming off some big wins. Bama beats that ass.
Roll Tide.
Then we have, I have this game down twice. So we're not going to talk about Marquette and Creighton again. We're going to move on to Monday, February 10th. Baylor at number 5, Houston. What do we do about Baylor?
I don't know, man. They look a lot better. I mean, what a comeback win they had against Kansas. We didn't really talk about that game, but down, I believe it was 24.
24, I believe. Yep.
Down 24 at one point in that game, rallies all the way back to end up beating Kansas. This team has that capability every time they take the floor to beat anyone like that. If Edgecombe doesn't play, that's a big loss for this Baylor team. Houston is just so good, Colin. They're so good, and this Baylor team has proven to be so inconsistent. I think I have to take Houston in this one to win this, but Baylor can beat anyone on any night.
Yeah, I got to take Houston too, especially if Edgecombe's banged up. One guy that they don't talk about ever, it seems like, dude, I love what Robert Wright's doing. Good Lord. That is a guy that can take a basketball game over. And he did take that Kansas game over. And nobody saw that coming. So I'm going to take Houston too, especially being at home. I just don't think Baylor can edge it out. I don't know. I ride at Baylor every game, but yeah, it's Houston for me too. I don't want to overthink this.
I want to see Baylor win. I really do.
Yes.
I want to see them win.
Yes, I want Baylor in a bad way. They were one of my teams, my picks going into the season, so I want them to win too. I still think they have to do some things to secure a March spot. Personally, I still do. I think they're still floating around, or if they go south, they're out. So they need it. At least make it respectable. Tuesday, February 11th. These are the last 3 games that we're going to talk about. We have number 4 Tennessee at number 14 Kentucky. 2 teams that are just impossible to really pick. Kentucky needs it bad, and maybe that's why at home they don't let it happen again. Give me Kentucky, I think.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. They need this a lot more than Tennessee does. Tennessee's coming off of 2 really big wins. Kentucky coming off of 2 really bad losses. I'll take the Cats.
Yep. Number 6, Florida at number 22, Mississippi State. Can Florida beat Auburn and then go right back at it and beat Mississippi State? If they beat Auburn, give me Florida at Mississippi State. I think they're going to ride the wave if that happens. Actually, give me Florida either way.
If they beat Auburn, give me Mississippi State. If they lose to Auburn, give me Florida against Mississippi State. That's where I am. They'll win one of those 2 games.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, you're probably spot on with that. Last one we're going to talk about, number 7 Purdue at Michigan, number 24. I am not sold on this Michigan team, and I know that sounds crazy to some people. I'm just not. And maybe it's because every time I watch a Michigan game, I'm like 0 for 3, putting wagers on Michigan basketball games. So they are my kryptonite, and I can't stand them right now. So give me Purdue.
Michigan got embarrassed on the road at Purdue. I think they lost by 30, upper 20s to 30s. They got embarrassed, and they're not that much worse than Purdue. You're going to see Michigan come out on fire. I think these bigs are going to be too much for Purdue to handle in this one. Purdue got really, really hot from 3 the first time they played each other.
Yeah.
These bigs for Michigan never really got a chance to dominate the game like they wanted to. It was more of a track meet. Michigan controls pace. I really think Michigan picks up a home win.
I can totally believe that as well. But Garrett, one thing here that we are not short on great college basketball games, and we are not short on the details when we talk about these basketball games. So I don't really have anything else this episode, man. I think we touched on it all, and we'll get back in here in the lab next week and really break it down again, man. If you have anything else to add, hit me with it now, and then if not, I'm going to get us out of here.
I got let's get the heck out of here. We got a tie game. St. John's, UConn are knotted up.
All right, man, we got to get to that. So, hey, everybody, thanks for tuning in. Once again, this is Foul 'em Hard with Deep Threat Sports Network with Garrett and Collin. Hey, you guys can follow us out there on X at DT_sports_. Facebook, Deep Threat Sports Network. Instagram, Deep Threat Sports with a Z. TikTok, Deep Threat Sports Network. And YouTube, Deep Threat Sports. Spotify, Deep Threat Sports. Once again, that's Garrett. I'm Collin. Hey, brother, enjoy basketball. Until next time, peace.
Yeah.